So we're going to talk again about what the problem is we have here in town. We'll give a brief definition of Proposition 2.5, just so everybody understands exactly what this means to them. We're going to compare ourselves to the surrounding towns, and then we're going to hear from the department heads. And like I said, I'm going to try to go through mine fairly quickly because I really want to make sure that you hear from the department heads exactly the way they've been affected over the last few years. So what's our problem here in town? The problem we have in North Attleboro, if you've listened to Mark Fisher make his presentations, he's done a phase 1 and a phase 2 presentation. We've got a revenue problem here in town, okay? It's not an expense issue. North Attleboro does a very good job managing their expenses. Again, North Attleboro, we're not talking about Massachusetts, we're not talking about federal government. Our town does an excellent job managing their expenses. At the April 25th Selectmen's meeting, Frank Byron from the independent CPA firm Melanson and Heath got up and presented the findings of an audit they did on the town's books. They came back with what they call a clean opinion, and that's the best result you can get after having your books audited, meaning they found no issues with the way the state of North Attleboro spends their money. Everything was accounted for, and they're following proper accounting procedures. In addition to that, or as a result of that, our bond rating right now with Standard & Poor's is a AA-, which is very good. There's no reason to think that that bond rating will change at all because we've received this good opinion letter, okay? So as I mentioned, the issue we have is with revenues. And the problem we're having is that our revenues have been shrinking, or more precisely, our expenses are increasing faster than our revenues are. So knowing that we have a revenue issue here in North Attleboro, what are our options? How can we affect our revenues? Well, we can increase our existing fees. The town right now is looking at that, and Chief Brousseau may talk about it today, but one of the things that recently happened at a selectmen's meeting is the ambulance fees were increased in town, okay? The town is looking at all of their fees and making sure that the fees are in line with the services that are provided. So if you pay $5 for a dog license, does the $5 really cover the time it takes for that one person to print out the dog license, to make sure the rabies shots are updated, the paper for the license itself, the medallion, the license that the dog's given? Just going through all the fees and making sure that we're being properly compensated for what we provide. We can also institute new user fees. The biggest thing that I'm sure everybody's heard about is the fees that were implemented by the schools last year for transportation, athletics, and activities. I don't know if anybody here when they were younger, but I know growing up on the South Shore, we never paid to have our trash collected. Well, we pay to have our trash collected here in North Attleboro. One comment was made from the town and other towns that we talked to was these fees, whether they be increases or new fees, are nothing more than overrides that the taxpayers don't get to vote on, okay? And I should have mentioned up front, as far as the research we've done, we have spoken with other towns that have successfully passed overrides, and some that haven't too. The town of Arlington, the town of Franklin, the town of Walpole. So as I mentioned, over the last 11 months, it's been a group of people that have done a lot of research and had a lot of conversations about what an override is all about and if it makes sense. The other thing we can do for revenue is increase our real estate taxes. And there's two ways you can do that. The first is through a debt exclusion. And what a debt exclusion says is that property taxes will be increased for the length of the duration of the debt. So for example, this building that we're in right now, the police station, was paid for with a debt exclusion. When that debt is paid off, the tax rates go back down, okay? It's not part of our permanent tax rate here in town. What we're talking here today about is a Proposition 2.5 general override, okay? A debt exclusion is meant to pay for a certain thing or an item, or it may be a specific line item in a budget. A Proposition 2.5 general override is meant to fund the operating budget of the town, okay? And when I say the operating budget of the town, this is not a school issue, okay? The school does receive the majority of the revenue from the town's budget just because the department's so big. But this override proposal is about all the departments in town. Every single department in town has suffered cuts over the last few years. So what is a Proposition 2.5 override? Again, I want to make sure this is clear to everybody. In 1980, Massachusetts, the taxpayers, the voters of Massachusetts, passed a law that said no Commonwealth, in no city or town, municipality in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts can increase their taxes by more than 2.5% each year. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about what a levy limit is, but that's what the 2.5% refers to. Since 1980, we have seen activity around overrides due to the fact that anybody who's read the papers knows that basically the rate of inflation is more than 2.5%. So if we can only increase our revenues by 2.5% every year, how are we going to keep up with just the rate of inflation, let alone any other expenses that the town has? As I mentioned before, we've done a great job managing our resources, but it's time to initiate a change. Okay, we're at that critical point now where we can't pull a rabbit out of a hat anymore. There's no other places to find the money. And honestly, as you'll hear from the department heads, if we do face further cuts, we're going to be in a serious situation. So again, what's an override? As I mentioned, it raises what they call the levy limit. The levy limit is the maximum amount of revenue that a town can collect on their real estate taxes, and that all their taxable property in town. Okay, that level is set by the state of Massachusetts. Okay, so if you look at the screen in 2014, the bottom line, our levy limit is $43.9 million. That's the maximum amount we can collect from our property taxes. Now that includes a 2.5% increase from last year, because that's the maximum we can go up. So last year the levy limit was 43.9 minus 2.5%. Okay? What an override says is that you can increase that levy limit by more than that 2.5%. So what we're proposing in North Attleboro is an override of 7.3%. Okay? So the bottom line represents, again, current levy limit going up by 2.5% every year. What the top line represents is an override passes in 2014. Our levy limit then goes from 43.9 million to 47.1 million. It's a one-time increase in the levy limit that brings the levy limit to a new high. Okay? From there, it only goes up 2.5% every year. We're back to Proposition 2.5. Okay? So because there's a 7.3% increase this year, it doesn't mean next year there's another 7.3% increase. This override only deals with this 1 year. However, that 1 year is a permanent increase in the levy limit. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So how do we compare to other towns? We've constantly heard the feedback that we get a good deal here in North Attleboro, and we do. If you look at the second column, the average single-family tax bill in 2013, for the average home valued at $318,000 in North Attleboro, the tax bill is $4,059. Compared to the surrounding towns that are on this chart, it's $1,000 less. Now, some of these towns have different demographics, but the point is, we're getting a pretty good deal here in North Attleboro. The amount of money we spend per capita on public safety is $51 less than the surrounding towns. And the 2012 per pupil expenditures is $1,800 less than these surrounding towns. And it's just an interesting note, when we first started doing this presentation, we had 2011 figures in that last column, and when I updated it for 2012, every other town on that chart went up, except for Attleboro, which went down by $3, and North Attleboro, which went down by over $100. Okay? So what does it mean to us? As I mentioned, the levy limit is $43.9 million for 2014. That includes the 2.5% increase from last year. Our proposed override amount is $3.19 million, 7.3% increase in the levy limit. The average single-family tax bill, as we just saw, is $4,059. So the increase in that average single-family tax bill attributable to the override is $295 per year. It's It's not one time, it's per year. Okay? $75 a quarter, $25 a month. Told not to use the phrase $1 a day because it's cliche to people, but that's the average for the average taxpayer in North Attleboro. Okay? Again, want to stress, it's a one-time increase in the levy limit, but it's $295 a year in your tax bill. Okay? Any questions about that? And the reason I'm stressing that, I don't want to belittle anybody, but there was a letter to the editor today that there was some misinformation about, so I just want to make sure we're clear what the override means. So with that, I'm going to ask Chief Riley to come up and talk about his department and what they've experienced over the last few years.